I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. All the ways you can communicate with us right there at the bottom of your screen. You can email us. The address is thestory@kgw.com. You can also use the hashtag if you want to be fancy and cool, TheStoryKGW on Twitter, or you can leave us an old-fashioned voicemail. Just call our phone number 503-226-5090. Tonight, there are understandably tens of thousands of Ukrainian Americans across Oregon and Southwest Washington and beyond who are deeply, deeply worried about the events unfolding on the other side of the world. KGW's David Molko has been talking to some of them and joins us. David, for the first time, welcome to The Story and welcome to KGW. I'm so glad you're here. And you've been talking to folks in that community. What are you hearing from them?
Yeah, Pat, I've got to say, it is great to be here. Thanks very much for the welcome here. One of the guys we talked to today, his name is Yuri Boyechko. He was really pretty blunt. He's a local magazine publisher, Canon Magazine in the Ukrainian community. I got to tell you, a lot of people just haven't slept in the last 24 hours. I mean, tens of thousands of Ukrainian Americans in Portland and Southwest Washington. It is not panic so much as being stunned by the speed and breadth of Russian aggression. And really, frankly, here, it is stunning. So he said he was in shock, speechless, trying to pull himself together, make some quick, smart decisions about what to do here to help. So we know there's going to be a special prayer service at the Ukrainian Baptist Church that's in Fairview Sunday evening at 6 p.m. Also a fundraiser. We'll update you if that changes. But more than prayers, really, you know, they want to speed efforts to send over shipments of what's needed right now. That looks like medical supplies. I think the casualty numbers, at least according to the Ukrainians, 100, 150 plus at this point. Folks here have been doing this since 2014. That's when Russia annexed Crimea, you might remember. So a local company donates them, then the community raises funds, upwards of $20,000 per shipping container. But the challenge right now, airspace is closed, supply chains disruptions, runs on banks. So they're really trying to grapple with where do you even start when you can't send packages? Who knows what the mail is like? Electricity. I mean, really back to basics here.
Yeah, and how terrifying for people here who have family there. What's that like?
And you know, one of the best ways to look at this is this amazing interview we had last night. One of my colleagues actually picked it up off Zoom. She was talking to a pastor here in Vancouver. His name, Paul Demyanik with the Ukrainian Baptist Church. Now, partway through that interview, because you talk about family here, his brother-in-law, a father of four who lives in the Ukrainian capital, joins the Zoom conversation. Now, he works for a Dutch company there, and here's part of what he said.
I just have like two minutes because I have to leave now to the company because they're now asking to bring vehicles, to give vehicles to the army. Panicked people, we see big lines at the petrol stations, but I really hope that there will be more support given to Ukraine. Although, to be honest, it's too late.
Also, to be honest, it is too late. Now, when he says support, he's talking about international support, not local support, not medical supplies. But that little snapshot of a dad leaving his family to do his part to help essentially supply the army, you know, that gives you a glimpse into the impact this really has on ordinary people. And again, we're just 24 hours in. By the way, I got to mention explosions about 5 kilometers away at a nearby military base. The family, young children, also dealing with that.
Wow. And you're joining us here at KGW after years of overseas reporting, especially in Asia Pacific. But what's your take on all this from your background?
You know, I haven't reported in Russia, Ukraine, but Korea, Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, all of these places. And the perspective I want to bring here is it's always easy to get bogged down in numbers, right? In a war, in troops, tanks, bombs, you know, sizes of things, maps, what politicians say or don't say. I mean, that's kind of your specialty here, Pat, watching the program this week. There is time to cover all of that, but what I want to say is what's most impactful from my experience, what creates change, what gets attention, making sure you don't lose sight of the people at the heart of the story, in this case, a war in its first 24 hours. So their stories, their worries, their heartbreak, and of course, at the end of the day, their hopes.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, David. Appreciate your insights.
You're welcome.
And now to the big story. It's a big headline tied to homelessness and the housing crisis. Nothing's really opening yet, but still, it seems there is finally some progress. So here we go. The headline is the map. These are the final 6 sites for Portland's Safe Rest Villages. The villages will hold tiny homes that Portland wants to open up at sites across the city. Officials say each village will house 50 people at once, get them services and stability, then move them into housing. Officials had already selected 2 locations. Those are the red pins. Today, they unveiled the 4 remaining ones. Those sites are in green. They include one in North Portland, another in Northeast Portland, one downtown, and one in Southeast Portland. Here's a little video of today's press conference. It lasted about an hour. In it, Housing Commissioner Dan Ryan championed this announcement. He said getting these sites nailed down was surprisingly hard. Of course, we kind of knew that because the villages were originally supposed to open last year. Now, months into 2022, we're just getting the location. So, yeah, we know you're behind. And we're told they will open before 2023. Let's bring in Maggie Vespa now. Maggie, you are our expert on this, covering the homeless issue for several years now. You know the topic as well as anyone. Why in the world is this taking so long? What's really happening behind the scenes there?
Well, Pat, good evening. You flatter me, frankly. I really appreciate it. I should note I've been covering homelessness for a while. I don't think that I've covered sort of the bureaucratic red tape that exists within Portland City Hall to the degree that we are in this story. And that does seem to be a big factor. You know, at first the city told us, and Housing Commissioner Dan Ryan told us, neighbor pushback and things like kind of earmarking the funds that they got, the COVID funds. That was kind of complicating how they were going to spend the money, like kind of predictable hurdles. But recently, he's been kind of more transparent about the fact that a lot of these different properties, including this one, are owned by different city bureaus. This is owned by the Bureau of Environmental Services, and not all of those bureaus want to play ball. And in fact, this came up at that press conference today. Here's an exchange that we had.
And then we had the predictable issues with supply chain, and then the predictable issues, as you were pointing to, about not in my bureau.
Just a quick follow-up. When you said not in my bureau, that feels like obviously a play on not in my backyard. Are there bureaus that are refusing to help with this?
I think that anytime you're, I think what I really wanted to say about that is that, people have plans for their bureaus. And when you're in an emergency, that's a hiccup to those plans. So we are now able to lean in as one big organization and know that this is a priority.
So, reporters had some questions about that because people sitting at home, frankly, I mean, we read these emails. They don't really care about the different bureaus battling it out. They see this as the city. Why can't the city do what the city wants to do with city-owned land? So the second headline today was the fact that they announced this emergency declaration. The mayor is taking control of the land, the city-owned land they want to use for these villages. He's going to control that now, and he's giving it to the Housing Bureau to kind of cut through this red tape. So Ryan hopes that speeds things up.
Okay, that does make sense. Seems like maybe 6 months ago would have been a good time to do that, but thank you. And what do you think? Is it a coincidence now that this is all happening as Commissioner Ryan runs for re-election?
That's a good question. Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, this is objectively late, right? Like you talked about, this was supposed to happen by the end of 2021. Now it's going to happen during 2022. So even if this delay happened and it was still a while until he got reelected, that would probably be brought up by opponents. But the timing is interesting for sure. Absolutely.
And I'm sure that people are working hard on this. But as I recall, there's something like 2,000 people out on the streets. What do you think? Will putting 300 people into these shelters make a difference?
Obviously officials and advocates would say yes. And I think part of it is kind of something that you mentioned in the intro. Each of these is going to house 50 people, right? So that's 300. But the important thing is 300 at once. Whenever people see those numbers, they think, well, 300 people, like that's not that many. But the idea is you get 300 people in, and then quickly you get them into services and you get them into housing, and then they get replaced by 300 more people. And the plan here is to have everybody get into these villages, get that stability, get those services, and then get out into permanent housing within 6 to 9 months. So they'll say once you get something like this set up, it becomes cyclical, it's a well-oiled machine, and it helps get more and more people off the streets quickly. So that's their hope, and then they hope to have kind of other programs doing that same work behind the scenes, and they're trying to grow those as well.
All right, thank you, Maggie Vespa, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is why she's the best homeless reporter in Portland. Thank you, Maggie.
Thanks, Pat.
Now, let's get to an email that we got about the former Wapato jail, which is now being used as a homeless shelter and drug treatment center. Dwight wrote in and asked, with all these stories recently about the homeless crisis, I have not heard anything about how successful the Bybee Lakes Hope Center has been in moving people out of the revolving cycle of homelessness. If it is a success, why? And how can the local and regional governments replicate that model? Well, that's a great question, Dwight, and we can answer it with a column in the Oregonian that we think is worth your time. To answer the first part of your question, yes, the center has been a success since it opened in the old Wapato jail in 2020. It's a referral program, which means people can't just walk in off the street, and they have to be willing to stay clean and sober. Columbia Sportswear hires people living there. Right now, 65% of those residents have jobs. And that's great because having a steady income is a big part of getting a permanent place to live. Now to the second part of Dwight's question. How can local and regional governments replicate the model? Well, in my opinion, they're going to have to first drop their bias against moving unsheltered people into a large facility. Many in the government hate that idea, but it is working at that former Wapato jail, and they need to get over it, in my opinion. So far, the government actually has not shown much interest in the program, though. Jordan Schnitzer and other big private donors helped foot the bill to open the place. And when asked how much the city and county have contributed, the founder, Alan Evans, told the Oregonian, quote, "Not a penny." Come on. But maybe that's going to change. 200 more beds just opened at the center, and now Mayor Ted Wheeler is taking notice. He recently said, "The county has been fundamentally opposed to the Wapato facility being used in any capacity for homelessness or treatment, but we are in critical need of treatment beds. That's what Bybee Lake offers. That's why we should support it." We'll be watching for that. Elsewhere, the Oregon Health Authority reports today 856 new cases of COVID. We're telling you that because it is a huge deal. It's the first time the count has been under 1,000 since late December. That if you exclude weekends and holidays when less cases get reported. So we may be seeing the light at the end of the COVID tunnel. And with any luck, it's not an oncoming train. Governor Kate Brown and the Oregon Health Authority announced that in 23 days, on March 19th, check your calendars, the indoor mask mandate goes away. They'll no longer be required inside public spaces, no longer required inside public or private schools. Oregon education leaders said the schools will get new guidance from the state.
These guidelines will continue to support our North Star goal of providing in-person learning for every student all day, every school day.
The drop of seriously sick people is impressive, 48% down from the peak in late January. New infections reported to the state are also down about 80%. That number, by the way, does not include home tests, which don't have to be reported. The test positivity rate, look at that, it's falling. The weekly average about 8%, that's pretty good. And the hospitalizations are falling steeply as well. I think we got those flipped, but you get the idea. They're all going down. Hospitalizations now 528. Nice to see it all coming down so fast. For you recent history fans, yes, we do remember Governor Brown declaring Oregon open for business back on June 30th of 2021.
And of course, we are celebrating that today, Oregon is 100% fully open.
Well, that would have been nice if it had stayed, but it didn't. And the next variant arrived and everything shut down again. Here's to hoping the worst of COVID has finally run its course. No idea what the anti-mask and pro-mask crowds are going to do, what they're going to argue about in 23 days when it's all done. Maybe they won't argue about anything. Wouldn't that be nice? Last night, we asked you a question. What makes someone an Oregonian? You all had a lot to say about that.
You become a real Oregonian by getting baptized by the spray at Depot Bay.
You are not a true Oregonian until your feet start to have webs.
When the story continues. Welcome back, and please keep sending your questions and comments. You can email us thestory@kgw.com or just give us a good old-fashioned call and leave a voicemail. 503-226-5090. We really do want to hear from you. Last night, boy, did we hear from you. We asked a question and we were eager to hear the answer because, you know, things can go a lot of different directions. We wanted to know what makes a person an Oregonian. We know that Nick Kristof is out of the governor's race because the Secretary of State's office does not consider him to have been an Oregonian long enough to run for governor. He disagrees, saying his roots go deep in the state, but we wanted to hear from you. If you live in Oregon, do you consider yourself an Oregonian? And when did you reach that point? Here are some of the responses we got. A lot of people mentioned the weather. Kira said, Do not carry an umbrella, build a fire at the beach in the rain, and wear a tank top in 53-degree weather. And Bruce said, I think you can be considered an Oregonian when you live here through 3 winters, maybe 2 if they're bad. In fact, a few said, you've got to wait until you don't even notice the weather. We got these voicemails.
At that time, there was a thing going around that native Oregonians had webs between their toes because it rained a lot more than it rains now. And one day I had to go to the bank. I was halfway back to my car before I realized I was getting wet. Didn't even notice it was raining. I think that's part of being an Oregonian.
You are not a true Oregonian until your feet start to have webs.
Amen to that one. Some of you have mentioned places to travel. Janice said, you know you're an Oregonian if you've traveled Oregon all the way to Ontario, been to Rome, Oregon, and been to Lakeview, the farthest corners of eastern Oregon. And Lynn mentioned the coast.
Hi, my name is Lynn, and you become a real Oregonian by getting baptized by the spray at Depot Bay.
I love that. But for some, it's as simple as where you were born.
My name is George Baker. I live in Toledo, Oregon. I was born in Silverton, Oregon in April 1942. I've never lived anywhere else, so the acronym SNOB, which stands for Society of Native Oregon Born.
Although if you read it, it says snob. I'm just saying. But a lot of you said it's harder to pin down what makes you an Oregonian is how you relate with our state. Megan said to be an Oregonian, you need to live here, interact with a variety of people that also reside here as well, pay taxes, explore our state and the history, not just the touristy stuff, and to vote in our elections if you're able. And there may be a few things that unite most Oregonians. Rod seemed to sum it up well. A true Oregonian is someone who does not want to pump their own gas. And finally, Steve writes in, to become a true Oregonian, you must do 3 things. Drink a bottle of whiskey in 1 drink. By the way, don't try that. Wrestle a cougar. Don't try that either. 3rd one, you can decide on your own. Make love to a pioneer woman. Tell us what you think makes someone an Oregonian. And hey, we don't want to forget Washington. What makes someone a Washingtonian? What makes Washingtonians different than Oregonians? You can email us, find us on social media, or give us a call and leave us a voicemail. Speaking of pumping your own gas, that's something you might finally be able to do if a new bill passes. And if you worry it makes you less of an Oregonian, nah, you'll still be able to stay in your car. We'll talk about it when the story continues. Welcome back. In the last segment, some of you said not pumping your own gas makes you an Oregonian. On that note, we got this voicemail from Cheryl.
We were wanting to know where our state legislature is on the self-pump gas. We haven't heard any more. If you could let us know. Thank you so much.
Well, and thank you for your question. We'd love to. The legislature is considering a bill that would let Oregonians pump their own gas right now, but only if they want to. It's moved out of the Transportation Committee this week, but not without some heated back and forth between lawmakers. Chris Lehman, a reporter with KLCC Radio in Eugene, tweeted out the discussion in the committee. Representative Paul Evans said, I see this as corporate welfare writ large. And Senator Lee Byers said, I have a high level of distrust. And Representative Susan McLean said, I know the fire marshal's phone number. And then Senator Chris Gorsuch said, I don't know if you've seen people trying to pump their own gas, but not everyone is an expert. And I can just hear you Washingtonians across the border howling with laughter. And I'm sort of with you. I grew up in Seattle pumping my own gas. As you probably know, Oregon is just one of only 2 states in the nation where you cannot legally pump your own gas for the most part. The other is New Jersey. There are 17 reasons for the ban written into state statute. Some of them kind of wonky, like the fact that gas is a fire hazard and gas fumes are a health hazard, or people could slip on the ground, or the gas station could get there if they don't want to get out of the car when it's raining. Also, older folks and people with disabilities could have trouble pumping their own gas. To that end, this new bill would keep attendants at gas stations to help anyone who needs it or just doesn't want to get out of their car, especially if it's raining. We will keep you posted on where this bill ends up. We'll be right back. With a love story. Last summer, we introduced you to a Portland couple that reunited after 42 years apart. Their story became so popular, it spread across the country. Well, recently, Catherine Cook and photographer Kurt Austin followed up with the couple.
I love you, a bushel and a peck, a bushel and a peck, and a hug around the neck.
When Tennyson wrote, "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all," he missed the part about lost love.
I mean, we got 42 years to catch up on.
Roaring back to life.
Yeah. Even 2 years ago, you could have sat me down and said, this is going to happen, and I'd say, nah, not a chance.
For Jeannie Gustafson and Steve Watts, that unwritten line is poetry in motion.
It's still kind of surreal.
Steve has another word for it.
Unbelievable. Oh, that's German.
It all makes sense.
So we got to find the right page here.
If you go back to 1972.
Yep. The German club. We're right here.
That's when Jeannie and Steve met at Loyola University, Chicago.
Late winter of 72. Steve and I are standing right here in the back.
It was the start of an 8-year-long relationship, but one they kept secret from Jeannie's mother. She didn't approve of the relationship because Steve was black.
That's his graduation photo. Oh, he was a hunk. I say that to him and he looks at me and he goes, a hunk of what? So we have nothing except this photo.
Baby, don't tell me.
Eventually, Jeannie broke up with Steve. Regret followed instantly and stayed with her for 42 years.
I regretted what I did after I did it. It was almost immediate.
Then, as we shared with you last summer, a series of miracles.
But I can't tell you how happy I was when I found out where he was.
That brought them together again. Jeannie found Steve in a care home outside Chicago. He'd been homeless for a time, lost a leg to infection, and suffered 2 strokes that robbed his ability to speak clearly. Jeannie, a retired nurse, brought Steve back to Oregon to start over.
He's made a lot of improvement, even in the 6 months that he's been here. One of his goals is to stand. I tell him nothing is impossible based on everything that's happened so far.
I'll give you the light of the moon.
It helps that so many people are pulling for these two. Since their reunion, their story has been shared around the world.
Don't make me wait too long.
The latest thing is People magazine with J-Lo on the cover, no less. We have a full-page article on page 52. How crazy is that? I thought the attention had pretty much died down, and then after after January 1st, so-and-so wants to talk to us, and
I can't get anything.
He can't get any sleep.
They joke, but Jeannie and Steve know what their story means to others. The gifts and words of support say it all. Many from interracial couples who faced hardships of their own.
I try and thank people for what they're saying, but also what I think is people want to hear something good nowadays.
So I had to ask, would there be any extra special news to share on this Valentine's Day?
All right, you tell her.
We're going to get married. She decided.
Tears of joy from this reporter. It's true. And one good turn deserves another.
Come on in, Steve. We have a surprise.
A Valentine's Day surprise.
Let me
from Jeannie to Steve. There are so many songs, holidays, and milestones to make up for.
I mean, we've got nothing but time.
And time clearly has nothing on them. Just maybe a little wisdom.
Follow your heart. I didn't do that the first time around. I should have.
In Northwest Portland.
I know.
Catherine Cook.
I know. I love you too.
KGW News.
Yeah. Follow your heart.
Ah, yes, it's not all bad in the world. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. But remember, the story, our story, that never ends. See you tomorrow.